The thrusting shields are an extremely underrated weapon category, and it's to the point that I'd consider these weapons to be one of the best at two-handing and one of the best at light attack spam and just guard counter builds, as these are offensive based shields that do offer you piercing damage, which as I always mention is the best damage type in the game due to a lot of enemies being weaker to it and that counter attack damage exists. Now these weapons actually can get just as much damage as a heavy thrusting sword, but actually get faster light attack combos, so actually can output a bit more DPS. Now not if you compare it to the sword lance, because that one is like utterly broken. Now it's not going to get as much range nor as have good as a moveset as the heavy thrusting swords, but what makes these so incredible is that you can block and attack at the exact same time with basically every single part of the moveset. And the fact that throughout most of the animation you're going to be blocking means you're taking a lot less damage and you're not going to get staggered. And the funny thing is you actually get a blocking light attack that you can keep spamming over and over again, and this is actually going to give you blocking frames throughout the entire animation, and is just as fast, does just as much damage, and just as much stance damage. These light attacks do roughly 11 stance damage per attack, which that is just insane for how fast these things are. Like that's almost just as much as a halberd or a greatsword in terms of stance damage with its light attacks. But as good as the light attacks can actually be with these weapons, I think it's probably the best weapons for guard countering, and that's mainly because that you actually get blocking frames before and after the animation. Typically when you're going to go with guard countering or deflecting types of builds, you want to be able to guard counter in the middle of an attack combo, but sometimes you might get staggered out of it because you don't get hyper armor, or you might get staggered out of the recovery animation. But with a thrusting shield, you're going to get hyper armor, you're going to block the first part of the animation, and you're actually going to block afterwards as well. And you can just keep chaining it back and forth. Any single time that you block, you can just go straight into the guard counter again. And these guard counters are really fast, are going to do piercing damage, which in most cases, if you are going to be using it in the middle of an attack combo, you're probably going to get that counter attack damage, and it's going to be doing just as much stance damage as a greatsword guard counter. So whether you build around these with a light attack build or a guard countering build, it's going to be amazing. And you could also go with a weapon skill build because it does actually offer you a bunch of these poking attack types of skills. Now the thing is with these types of skills, it's not going to be doing as much damage compared to some of the other different types of weapons in the game. So for the most part, I would just go with a Cragblade infusion and just go all into light attack spam or guard countering. Now as good as these thrusting shields are, it's definitely not going to be without any downsides. I think the major one is going to be its moveset, specifically with things like the running attacks and the heavy attacks. I don't really like them at all with how long that they actually can be. Specifically that charged heavy attack is like just as long as a colossal weapon, but it's not going to be doing as good a damage, and it's only going to be doing 24 stance damage, which for comparison, a small shield and a claw weapon can do more stance damage than this. And in the time that you actually use this heavy attack, you could just use like the light attack 3 times and just do more damage, be more consistent, and just do more stance damage. Now with all that being said, I think the most annoying part about the thrusting shields is going to be its synergy with elemental builds. There's like almost no reason for me to actually want to use these things with these elemental infusions, because of one, if you are going to change the element of the type, you are going to sacrifice its piercing damage, which is extremely useful to have, especially with this weapon as you're just always trading out. And it also lowers the guard boost and physical guarded damage negation by a whole bunch, which I guess it kind of makes sense if you're going to infuse shields, but with this like offensive type of shield, it would have been nice if that just wasn't the case, because if the most important part about the weapon is being able to block and attack at the same time, and the blocking functions just work way worse with particular infusions, there's like almost no reason to actually use those infusions. So basically every single time that I'm building around the thrusting shields, it's just a strength build all the way. Just go heavy infusion, Cragblade, and just either R1 spam or guard counter, and I think that's the most optimal method. You could also just leave them standard infused, because even just infusing it like quality or heavy still actually lowers the guard boost and damage negation, but it's not by that much more, and I think the damage benefits are just way better. But yeah, those are the few downsides to an otherwise just amazing weapon class. But for today, we are going to compare both the dueling shield and the CARIAN thrusting shield. Obviously, normally I just do a ranking video, but being that there's only 2, I'm just going to do a comparison video. And once again, do keep in mind, it's just for PvE. The dueling shield I consider to be the worst of the 2 thrusting shields, but it isn't by much. Both of these still perform very similar. The exact same moveset, similar weight, damage, range, scalings, both can be infused. Like there isn't really too much different between these weapons, and it kind of makes me wish that they actually added a bit more thrusting shields, specifically some like unique types ones with unique skills. But the main reason why I am going to prefer the CARIAN thrusting shield over the dueling shield is that the CARIAN thrusting shield gets a lot better blocking, and with these weapons, as I've mentioned, blocking is like the most important part about it, as you're just always going to have a bunch of blocking frames throughout all of your attacks. So inherently, the CARIAN thrusting shield I'm just going to prefer a bit more. Now the dueling shield does actually get more damage, because the CARIAN thrusting shield does actually get a bit of split damage, but it isn't really that much of a damage difference, specifically with the normal upgrade paths. If you were to go with like a flame art infusion, you actually might notice a pretty significant damage difference. But as I mentioned earlier, you always want to stay with these like regular normal infusions, because the elemental infusions make the blocking of the weapon even worse. And it can go from a weapon that has like better than medium shield types of blocking blocking to levels of like small shield types of blocking. So if you wanted to go with an elemental shield, the dueling shield might still be your best option, especially if you are going to go with a cold infusion, because the scalings for the cold infusion for the dueling shield are way better than the CARIAN thrusting shield for whatever reason. So I think that's going to be the major benefit of that. And if you actually did want to counteract the effects of just like a lot worse blocking, you could just slap on the barricade shield Ash of War, and this can just help mitigate this completely. So yeah, for me, I think that's just like the major benefit of the dueling shield, is that if you just wanted to maximize your damage and use things like barricade shield or the deflecting tit where you're not really going to take much damage or much stamina damage anyway, this one is probably going to be the best one, especially because you do get it a bit earlier and it's not going to involve you having to spec into a little bit of intelligence like the CARIAN thrusting shield is. But the CARIAN thrusting shield is going to be the better of the two thrusting shields. For reasons, as I did mention, is that it does get better blocking. When it comes to its guard boost and physical guarded damage negation, it's just much higher than the dueling shield. Now, it's not going to hit as hard due to its split magic damage, and it's not going to be as light or have lower requirements. But the differences between all those things aren't that big to warrant me having to sacrifice a lot better blocking just to go with a dueling shield. And the 15 intelligence requirement that it does have isn't really that big of a deal as well, because the Scholar's Shield spell exists, which this is a very nice shield buff that does give you a bunch more guard boost and a whole bunch more guarded damage negation, and it gives especially good damage negation with magic. So against particular types of enemies, you can just like block entire combo chains and not really take much damage at all. Now, if you actually wanted to focus on more things like damage and stance damage, I think Cragblade is going to be the better weapon buff, because both of these are going to be weapon buffs that just override one another. But you could just use Scholar Shield and actually go with a damaging type of skill, things like Impaling Thrust or Piercing Fang. These are just really good skill options, so you can just gain access to a shield that just blocks very well, is going to give you blocking frames throughout all of your attacks, and is going to output a decent amount of damage. Okay, that is that one now done. As always, let me know what your opinions are down in the comments below. If I did miss anything, just discuss it down there. Now, as for the next video, I was probably going to rank all of the backhand blades, which yes, there's only 3 of them. So it's going to be another shorter video, but that will probably be next. So definitely subscribe for that one. And do follow me on Twitch as well, because that's where I do all my testing when it comes to every single one of these weapons. The next couple of runs are going to be backhand blade based. So definitely do pop by. Anyway, catch you guys around. See ya.